7 months pregnant and running on the kind of exhaustion that makes every breath feel heavier than the last, I still forced myself to move through each day because someone depended on me in ways no one else understood. My name is Amber Lynn, and before everything fell apart, I believed I had already survived the hardest months of my life. I spent nearly every hour caring for my father-in-law because he had reached a stage where even the smallest decline felt frightening. I wanted to help him stay comfortable, yet I could not ignore that my husband had started returning home later with excuses that never matched what I saw in his eyes. The guilt, the distance, the strange tension every time I walked into a room felt impossible to ignore, although I kept convincing myself that pregnancy stress had simply made me too sensitive. Things escalated quickly when my sister moved into our home after claiming that she needed a temporary place to stay. I expected support or even comfort from her, but what I received instead was a shift in the atmosphere that I could not explain. Their conversations stopped whenever I approached, their glances grew sharper, and the silence between them became far more revealing than anything they actually said. Something inside me insisted that a truth was growing right in front of me, yet I was not ready to see it clearly. The night everything changed, I finally asked a question that had been burning in my chest. "Marcus, why were you with Elise last night? It's not what you think. If you want to hear how I uncovered everything and how I confronted the people who betrayed me, make sure to stay with me. Follow the story closely and let me know your thoughts, because your support truly helps me continue sharing these experiences." 6 months earlier, everything was already falling apart in ways I was too overwhelmed to recognize, because my focus stayed on the responsibilities that had suddenly become heavier than anything I had ever carried. When my father-in-law Benjamin was brought into my home for long-term care under the recommendation of his doctor, I knew my routine would change significantly, yet I did not anticipate how deeply the adjustment would shake the foundation of my marriage. Benjamin needed attention that required constant monitoring, and although I wanted to help him through this stage with compassion, I could feel the pressure building faster than I could process it. My sister Elise contacted me a few days after Benjamin arrived and explained that her freelance business had completely collapsed, leaving her unable to maintain her apartment. She asked if she could stay in my home for a few weeks until she managed to recover financially, and although I felt hesitant because Benjamin's care already consumed every spare moment I had, I still agreed because she insisted that she would help with anything I needed. Elise arrived with an upbeat attitude that initially felt comforting, yet something in her behavior shifted quickly once she settled into the guest room. My husband Marcus reacted to the sudden changes by expressing frustration that the house no longer felt peaceful, although he tried to present his concerns as reasonable rather than insensitive. Marcus disliked disruptions to his routine, which made Benjamin's presence difficult for him, and Elise's arrival created even more tension that he attempted to conceal with forced politeness. I understood that he felt burdened, but I hoped he would adjust with time because families sometimes needed to handle difficult seasons together. Elise began participating in household activities with a level of enthusiasm that seemed exaggerated, and instead of supporting me with Benjamin's care, she gravitated toward Marcus with a familiarity that felt unnecessary. She inserted herself into conversations that did not involve her, and commented on Marcus's schedule as if she had been part of our daily life for years. Elise volunteered to help Marcus with errands even when I had not asked for assistance, and she frequently offered opinions about how he could organize his time more efficiently. Her involvement created tension that I struggled to understand, because she behaved as though she belonged in every decision concerning our home. Benjamin required consistent supervision, which meant I spent long hours in his room checking medications and monitoring his breathing patterns. The time I dedicated to him prevented me from observing every interaction taking place in the rest of the house, and this limited visibility created a subtle anxiety that lingered in the back of my mind. Each time I stepped out of Benjamin's room, I noticed small hints that suggested Elise and Marcus had grown oddly comfortable around each other, although nothing appeared explicit enough for me to confront. I tried convincing myself that my exhaustion made me overly sensitive, yet the uneasiness continued rising despite my attempts to dismiss it. Elise repeatedly displayed an unusual level of interest in Marcus, often offering to assist him with tasks that he could easily complete alone. Her tone shifted into something almost performative when he entered a room, and she laughed at comments that were not remotely humorous. Marcus did not seem to encourage her openly, but he failed to establish any clear boundaries that could prevent misunderstandings. I observed these moments from a distance and wondered whether I was imagining patterns that did not exist, especially because Benjamin needed so much care that I barely had time to question anything happening outside his room. Although nothing in their interactions had escalated into something undeniable, a quiet discomfort took root in my thoughts as I tried to balance caregiving responsibilities with the uncertainty forming around me. I could sense a shift in the dynamics of my home, yet I had no idea how deeply those shifts would reshape the months that followed. 2 weeks later, the shifts in their behavior became impossible to ignore because every part of my daily routine began revealing changes that felt too consistent to dismiss as coincidence. I started waking up earlier than usual to manage Benjamin's medications and monitor his breathing patterns, and during those quiet hours I noticed that Marcus had left the house much earlier than required for his usual work schedule. He claimed he needed extra time to prepare for new responsibilities, yet his explanations sounded vague enough to make me pause in confusion regarding why he avoided clarity at moments when honesty should have come naturally. As the days passed, Marcus continued mentioning extended shifts with a tone that implied he expected no questions, and his certainty made me feel strangely isolated within my own home. His pattern grew recognizable because the timing of his departures aligned with moments when I became busiest with Benjamin's care, which meant I often remained alone in the house with Elise. Although I initially believed the arrangement would allow her to help me, I quickly realized she had shifted her attention entirely toward Marcus rather than assisting with anything meaningful. Elise began offering to help Marcus with unnecessary tasks during the evenings, such as reorganizing items that did not require any involvement, or asking whether he needed support with errands he usually completed without hesitation. She hovered near him with a type of attentiveness that appeared out of place, and she presented her offers in a tone that suggested she considered herself a crucial part of his routine. I observed these interactions while preparing Benjamin's nighttime medication, and although nothing seemed explicitly inappropriate, an uncomfortable edge lingered in every moment they shared. Benjamin's condition deteriorated steadily, demanding more of my time with each passing day. I spent long stretches sitting beside him to track his symptoms, and the emotional toll made it difficult to evaluate changes occurring outside his room. I attempted to focus entirely on his comfort because he depended on me during his most vulnerable moments. Yet the growing tension in the rest of the house pressed against my thoughts with a persistence that felt impossible to ignore forever. My exhaustion made it difficult to trust my instincts, although every instinct I had warned me something had shifted between Marcus and Elise. One afternoon, after Marcus left the house claiming he needed to finalize paperwork for a new project, I walked toward the hallway and heard Elise speaking on the phone in a voice far softer than she normally used. Her tone carried a hint of excitement mixed with something secretive, and the moment she heard my footsteps, she ended the call abruptly without providing a reason. She offered an unconvincing explanation about discussing unrelated matters, yet her expression betrayed a level of nervousness that made my stomach tighten. The conversation might have meant nothing, but the timing created a connection that I could not disregard entirely. Later that week, I attempted to check Marcus's phone to confirm an upcoming appointment because he had mentioned a schedule change. When I picked it up, the device requested a new passcode that I had never seen before, and the sudden alteration startled me enough to ask him directly that evening. He responded sharply, claiming he needed additional privacy due to work obligations, but the irritation in his voice suggested that he resented the question rather than the intrusion. His reaction left me standing in silence, unsure of how to interpret the sudden hostility that accompanied such a simple inquiry. Although each incident alone could have been excused as ordinary stress, the accumulation unsettled me in ways I struggled to articulate. I tried convincing myself that exhaustion played tricks on my perspective, and I repeated the same reassurance each night while preparing Benjamin's room for another long stretch of monitoring. Despite my efforts to remain rational, the emotional distance spreading between Marcus and me created a weight that settled deeper every day, and Elise's presence magnified the pressure in ways I still could not explain clearly. I wanted to believe everything remained normal, yet a quiet part of me recognized the possibility that normal had already disappeared without my consent. That afternoon carried a stillness that felt different from the usual rhythm of the house, and in that stillness I made a discovery that forced every quiet suspicion into sharp focus. I had gathered the laundry to prepare a full wash before returning to Benjamin's room, and while checking the pockets of Marcus's jacket, my fingers touched something unexpected. I pulled out a bright red lipstick that belonged to no one in the house, and the sight of it created an immediate rush of confusion that settled heavily inside my chest. I knew I had never worn that shade during my pregnancy, and I also knew there was no reasonable explanation for it to be hidden in his pocket without intention. I waited until Elise returned from her errands before deciding to ask a simple question about her plans during the previous evening, and the answer she provided came too quickly to feel genuine. She claimed she visited a small local market that closed early, yet her voice trembled slightly in a way that contradicted her attempt to sound casual. I noticed the inconsistency because she had been absent for hours, and the length of her absence did not match her explanation. My curiosity created a growing tension that I tried to conceal beneath a neutral expression, although the uneasiness inside me sharpened with every word she spoke. Later that day, while organizing the garage, I remembered the camera installed near the entrance that we rarely checked, unless something unusual happened. A quiet impulse urged me to review the footage from the night before, and what I found changed the pace of my heartbeat immediately. Elise appeared on the screen walking beside Marcus at a time when both had insisted that they were in separate places, and they entered the garage together without any sign of urgency or surprise. Their familiarity in that brief moment made the lipstick in Marcus's pocket feel like a piece of a larger pattern that I had ignored for too long. When Marcus arrived home in the evening, I attempted to address the topic in a measured tone because I wanted clarity more than confrontation. The moment I mentioned his jacket, he glanced away, as if searching for a response that would shield him from the truth. His avoidance became more visible when I noticed a distinct scent of perfume on the fabric he had draped over the chair, and the fragrance differed sharply from anything I owned. His explanation lacked conviction and leaned on vague phrases that avoided the heart of the question, which made the distance between us grow stronger with every passing second. That night, after I helped Benjamin settle into bed, he made an offhand remark that caught my attention more deeply than anything he had said in recent days. His voice remained tired, yet steady, as he mentioned hearing Marcus and Elise whispering nearby during one of my short naps earlier that week. He spoke without accusation or intent, because his mind drifted between moments of clarity and confusion, yet the sincerity in his tone carried more weight than he could have understood. His comment connected the scenes I had witnessed throughout the day, and the pattern felt undeniable. With each new detail adding pressure to my thoughts, I decided to examine the schedule that Marcus had shared during the past few weeks. I reviewed receipts, travel times, and small inconsistencies that once appeared meaningless, yet now formed a thread of behavior that could not be explained by stress or exhaustion. The more I examined, the more the pieces aligned with the lipstick, the footage, and the hints scattered through Benjamin's comments. Every discovery created a mixture of dread and determination, because I understood that the truth would not remain hidden if I searched with unwavering focus. Although I attempted to approach the situation with caution, I felt a shift inside myself that afternoon, as if something unspoken had crossed a boundary I could no longer ignore. I had spent months believing the tension in the house stemmed from stress, illness, and exhaustion, yet the evidence I found revealed a different story beneath the surface. That realization changed the tone of the air around me, and I felt the weight of a truth that demanded to be uncovered no matter how painful the outcome might be. By the end of that week, the truth stopped knocking and instead pushed itself into my life with a force that left no room for denial. I reached a point where suspicion alone could no longer sustain the questions piling up in my mind, so I contacted a private investigator named Trent Maddox and asked him to monitor the movements of Marcus and Elise with discreet precision. I explained the unusual shifts in their behavior without revealing the emotional storm underneath, and Trent listened with the calm professionalism of someone who had handled too many cases that began with doubts and ended with heartbreak. Trent began surveillance early in the week with a quiet confidence that made me believe he would uncover answers, even if those answers terrified me. While I tended to Benjamin and maintained the fragile balance inside the house, Trent worked in the background, gathering small fragments of information that slowly formed a picture more revealing than anything I had anticipated. He updated me periodically, although the updates felt heavier each time because they hinted at truths I had tried to avoid for far too long. His tone remained neutral, yet the pauses between his words told me he understood the gravity of what he was finding. 3 days into the investigation, Trent contacted me and requested a brief meeting away from the house to discuss something he considered important. I drove to the quiet parking lot he suggested, and he handed me a small folder containing photographs that showed Marcus and Elise meeting at a short-term rental apartment in the northern part of Tampa. The photos captured them entering the building with an ease that implied familiarity, and the expressions on their faces demonstrated a level of comfort that contradicted everything they claimed at home. Seeing them together in a place chosen for secrecy forced a sharp ache through my chest that I could not hide from Trent's compassionate glance. When I returned home later that evening, Elise acted with a level of composure that felt almost theatrical in its effort to appear normal. She moved through the kitchen with a calmness that clashed violently with the images still fresh in my mind, and her attempts to start casual conversations only highlighted the divide between appearance and truth. The contrast between her behavior and the reality in the photographs created a dissonance that made every word she spoke feel hollow. She did not know what I had seen, which made her confidence unsettling rather than reassuring. Marcus continued insisting he needed to work late throughout the week, yet the schedule Trent tracked contradicted his claims with painful clarity. On nights when he said he stayed at the office, he was instead photographed walking beside Elise through dim parking structures or waiting with her outside the same rental building captured earlier. The consistency of the pattern left no space for alternative explanations, and the evidence grew in weight with every new piece Trent uncovered. The more I read, the more I understood that the story unfolding outside my awareness had been developing far longer than I realized. At the end of the week, Trent delivered a detailed report that documented the meetings between Marcus and Elise, with precise times, specific addresses, and direct quotes, recorded from conversations he captured through lawful surveillance measures. The report outlined their routines, the locations they favored, and the unmistakable tone of intimacy carried in the lines he transcribed. Reading their words on the page created a hollow ache that spread slowly through my chest, and I set the report down several times to steady my breathing before continuing. It felt as though every page confirmed that the betrayal extended far beyond suspicion, reaching instead into intentional decisions made behind my back. Despite the shock, my silence became strategic rather than emotional because I understood that reacting impulsively would only give them space to twist the narrative in their favor. I needed a plan that would reveal the truth in a way neither of them could deny, and I needed that revelation to carry enough weight to protect Benjamin, myself, and the child I carried. My quiet resolve grew stronger with each passing moment, and I felt something shift inside me as I prepared for a confrontation that would leave no possibility for excuses or escape. I stopped questioning whether I deserved honesty because the truth had already arrived. Now all that remained was deciding how to expose it with the impact it deserved. On the night everything finally broke, I realized the betrayal had reached a depth I had never prepared my heart to face. The atmosphere inside the house felt heavy from the moment the evening settled in, and I sensed a shift in the rhythm of the day that mirrored the changes building steadily around me. Benjamin's breathing had grown uneven throughout the afternoon, and the doctor who visited earlier expressed concern that his condition might decline faster than expected. I listened carefully as the instructions were given, because every detail mattered when caring for someone who depended entirely on my presence. Benjamin rested quietly when the sun disappeared, so I stayed near his bed and monitored the subtle changes in his expression. The tension in the house became more pronounced as time passed, and the quiet movement from the hallway reminded me of the fragile balance I was trying to maintain. When Marcus entered the room briefly, I hoped he would stay long enough to offer support, but he mentioned an urgent work situation and said he needed to leave immediately. His eyes avoided mine, and the abruptness of his departure tightened the unease already forming in my chest. I wanted him to understand that I needed him, yet the words remained unspoken because I knew he would ignore them. Not long after Marcus stepped outside, Elise came downstairs with a hurried energy that contrasted sharply with the calm expression she attempted to maintain. She said she needed to meet a friend about something important, although her explanation lacked substance and her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted her purse strap. She left the house less than 10 minutes after Marcus, and the sequence of their departures created a silence so unnatural that it settled deep in my thoughts. The timing felt deliberate, yet I forced myself to stay focused on Benjamin because he was the only person in that moment who deserved my full attention. As I checked Benjamin's temperature and adjusted his blanket, he opened his eyes with a clarity I had not seen for days. His gaze moved slowly to my face as if he recognized the storm behind my calm expression. In that brief window of awareness, he whispered words that struck me harder than any evidence Trent had shown. He said, "Do not let them hurt you." The simplicity of the sentence carried a depth that made me pause with my hand still holding his. I felt the sting of tears forming because he understood something had been disturbing me, even though I had not spoken openly about the unraveling truth. When the house settled into a deeper quiet, my phone buzzed on the nightstand beside me. Trent sent a message indicating he had captured something important that I needed to see immediately. I hesitated before opening the attachment because I already feared what it might show. The video displayed Marcus and Elise standing at the door of the rental apartment, and their closeness left no room for misinterpretation. They leaned toward each other with familiarity, and the brief kiss they shared confirmed the reality I had struggled to accept. Watching the video felt like observing a version of my life split in half, with one half breaking open in front of me, while the other half tried to hold itself together for the sake of Benjamin. Despite the ache intensifying inside my chest, I remained still because Benjamin deserved peace during his final days. I refused to let the chaos created by Marcus and Elise taint the respect I had for the man who had shown me kindness long before his illness confined him to the room where I now sat. I turned off the phone and placed it face down on the table, then took a slow breath to steady the emotions rising in waves. Confrontation could wait, because I needed to prioritize the dignity of someone who had never once betrayed my trust. As the night continued, I focused on Benjamin and allowed the truth to settle quietly inside me. I would deal with Marcus and Elise, but not until I finished honoring the man who had asked me, even in weakness, to protect myself from the people who had chosen deceit over loyalty. After Benjamin's memorial, I felt a calm resolve settling into my steps as I walked back into the house that had witnessed more betrayal than love. The quiet hum of conversations fading outside helped me gather the strength I needed to face what waited behind the living room walls. I was no longer operating from shock or disbelief, because the days leading up to this moment had stripped away any illusion I once held about Marcus and Elise. I carried myself with a stillness that surprised even me, because grief had softened every sharp emotion and left behind a clarity I could not ignore. The house felt strangely spacious after the guests left, and their absence allowed me to prepare for the confrontation with a steady focus. When Marcus and Elise returned home, they moved cautiously as if they sensed an imbalance in the air that neither could name. I remained seated on the living room sofa, and the silence that greeted them signaled that I expected their full attention. I asked both of them to sit because I wanted no confusion regarding the seriousness of the conversation that was about to unfold. They exchanged a quick glance before settling across from me, and their unease deepened as I reached for the small device resting beside my hand. I pressed play without offering a preface. Elise's voice filled the room with a confidence she no longer possessed, and she said, "Marcus, she will never find out." The recording captured the light laughter that followed, and the sound altered the atmosphere in a way that made both of them shift uncomfortably. Elise tried to stand, but her legs trembled, which forced her back into the seat. Marcus leaned forward and attempted to interrupt the recording, yet the second line spoken by Elise drowned out every excuse forming inside his throat. Elise covered her mouth with a shaking hand, and Marcus turned defensive with remarkable speed, attempting to blame the circumstances on misunderstandings that did not exist. He spoke rapidly about stress and confusion, and he tried to present himself as someone trapped in a situation beyond his control. I listened quietly because their panic spoke louder than any response I could have offered. I lifted my phone and opened the file containing the images Trent had gathered, then turned the screen toward them so they could face the full truth, without the comfort of denial. The photos displayed a sequence of meetings at the rental apartment, and their expressions shifted from panic to a hollow acceptance of what could no longer be hidden. Elise repeated Marcus's name, as if saying it would erase the evidence, yet each photograph solidified the reality they had tried to keep buried. Marcus attempted to reach for my hand, but I moved it away because I wanted nothing binding me to a man who had chosen deceit over partnership. When the room grew still again, I said I had filed for divorce with my attorney Lawson Green the day before the memorial. I explained that every document had already been submitted, and that all communication regarding the separation would go directly through him. The color drained from Marcus's face as the weight of the announcement settled onto him. Elise looked between us with a helplessness that revealed she understood the permanence of the decision. I held my position without wavering because I owed myself the dignity of a future untouched by their betrayal. A low murmur outside the window caught my attention because several neighbors had gathered near the porch after hearing raised voices earlier. They stood quietly and watched the scene through the open doorway, witnessing the collapse of the facade Marcus and Elise had tried so hard to maintain. Their presence added an unexpected layer of accountability that neither Marcus nor Elise could escape. I told both of them they needed to leave the house immediately, and my voice carried a finality that left no room for negotiation. Marcus attempted one last plea, but the firmness in my expression ended any thought of resistance. Elise gathered her belongings with trembling hands, while Marcus stepped toward the door with a defeated posture that reflected the consequences they had brought upon themselves. I stood motionless as they exited, refusing to offer comfort or forgiveness. The door closed behind them, and the silence that followed felt like the first breath of a life finally free from the shadows they had created. 1 month later, the consequences finally caught up with them, and the distance between our lives widened into something permanent. The days after the confrontation passed, with a clarity I had not felt in a long time, because the weight of uncertainty no longer hovered over my every step. I moved through each morning with a steadiness that reflected how deeply the environment around me had changed. The house felt quieter yet stronger, and the absence of their presence gave room for a calm I had forgotten I deserved. News about Marcus surfaced through formal channels rather than personal conversations, because I no longer allowed him direct access to my life. His company issued a severe warning after discovering multiple unexcused absences linked to nights he had claimed were filled with work. He faced the real possibility of losing his contract, and the investigation into his attendance records continued to cut deeper into the image he had tried to maintain. Knowing this did not bring satisfaction, but it reminded me of the cost of choices made without integrity. Elise, on the other hand, drifted into a kind of isolation that reflected the instability she had hidden behind carefully crafted charm. Her family severed all communication after learning about her involvement with Marcus, and her closest friends kept their distance because they wanted no association with the scandal she created. I heard through a neighbor that she moved from place to place, relying on temporary arrangements because no one wanted long-term responsibility for the turmoil that followed her decisions. The collapse of her social circle mirrored the collapse of the future she thought she could take from me. The court issued a contact restriction that limited Marcus's involvement to supervised visitation once the baby arrived. The judge reviewed the evidence supplied by Trent and reinforced that any attempts to communicate with me outside formal channels would be considered a violation. I felt an unexpected wave of relief when the order arrived because it marked a turning point where my safety and stability became protected by more than personal boundaries. The structure of the ruling also helped me focus on preparing for motherhood without the threat of emotional manipulation returning to my doorstep. My days fell into a gentle rhythm as I prepared the nursery and reorganized the house to create a space filled with warmth rather than the strain that once lingered in every corner. I found comfort in small routines that helped me reclaim my independence, and each evening closed with a deeper sense of peace. The anticipation of meeting my child softened the sharp edges of everything I had endured, and for the first time in months, I allowed myself to imagine a future untouched by betrayal. I rediscovered the strength that had been worn down during the chaos, and it grew more visible with every quiet decision I made to care for myself. I refused any suggestion of reconciliation because the damage Marcus and Elise caused reached far beyond a mistake or moment of weakness. Their choices dismantled the foundation of trust that once held our lives together, and I had no intention of rebuilding anything with people who had proven themselves capable of such disregard. My focus shifted entirely toward healing and nurturing a new beginning that existed solely for me and the baby. The finality of cutting them off brought a sense of dignity that I had long been deprived of, and I embraced it with unwavering commitment. When I looked around the living room one evening, the soft light made the space appear like a new chapter waiting to unfold. The memories of everything that happened no longer controlled the atmosphere because I had learned to separate the pain from the growth. I carried the lessons forward not as burdens, but as reminders of how deeply I had changed. My story no longer revolved around what they destroyed, but around what I rebuilt from the pieces they left behind. The past month taught me that betrayal reveals more than broken trust because it exposes the quiet strength a person discovers when forced to stand alone. I learned that boundaries are not punishments but protections, and that healing begins the moment we choose ourselves without apology. Pain loses its power once we stop fighting to understand the motives of those who never valued us. The lesson is simple. Dignity grows when self-respect becomes non-negotiable. Thank you for staying with me through this journey, especially through the moments that felt too heavy to hold alone. Your presence reminds me that stories of resilience connect us in ways we often overlook. If you have ever faced a crossroads where choosing yourself felt both painful and necessary, I would love to hear your thoughts. Share your experience in the comments so others can draw strength from it.